It's pretty astounding because it's not just that there's this cyclical strength in the dollar right now, and we know President Trump's not thrilled about that. There are major calls that the persistent strength and the persistent existence of dollar strength is a real problem for the world. What essentially, and of course that was voiced by Carney at Jackson Hole, what essentially is going on that allows the dollar to have the strength even if the fundamentals maybe don't justify it?
Well, it's largely a network effect. It's pervasive, it's ubiquitous. You look at the number of international trade contracts that are invoiced anywhere from 50 to 80%. 70% of the world has its currency linked in one form or the other to the dollar. You look at the amount of dollar-denominated debt, both the debt that we've issued to the world, which is about 16 trillion, and dollar-denominated debt that's issued outside the U.S., about 12 trillion, a total of $28 trillion in dollar-denominated debt. So there is this global financial cycle, which in turn is really a dollar cycle, and it's more of an impact on the rest of the world, which can come back and hit the U.S., but it's definitely something to be mindful of.
So, David, I mean, we've heard time and time again over the years attempts or at least some ideas proposed as to how to sort of loosen the grip of the dollar on the world, create some sort of other reserve currency, whether it's the euro, the yuan, or some sort of independent global currency. But as long as the United States is the largest economy, as long as it's the largest, most investable financial market, is there any sort of realistic option where that would happen?
No, again, network effects are strong, and there's been evidence that shows not only is the dollar grip where it is, it's actually getting stronger. Every time there's a crisis, dollar financing falls relative to other terms of financing, and more dollar-denominated debt is issued. So we see more debt in dollars denomination issued outside the U.S. So this dollar cycle actually builds upon itself. It's a network effect that grows with each crisis. So even as the size of the U.S. economy is shrinking in relative terms to world GDP, the reach of the dollar is growing.
What did you make of Mark Carney's synthetic hegemonic currency? I mean, can it become the new hegemon? Can it put the US dollar to one side?
I love the name, but I don't think it's a great idea. It's well-intentioned. He has all the right reasons for proposing it. But the reality is, in order to compete with the dollar, it's a huge uphill battle. Again, if you look at the amount of dollars-denominated debt, so there's about 16 trillion in liquid assets that we've issued to the world, and another 12 trillion outside. That's $28 trillion in dollar-denominated assets. You want to compete with that, that's a lot of assets you have to issue. And I just don't see the central banks of the world coming together and issuing anywhere near $28 trillion in assets. There is no substitute for the dollar currently. Now, maybe in the future there will be, but as it stands, we're stuck here. And as I wrote recently, it's a cross we bear in the U.S.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. So the dangers of dollar dominance for the rest of the world are, I think, fairly well understood. When the Fed hikes, that often can mean tighter policies and economies that can't stand it. And countries hoard dollars during the good times to save them for the bad times, but that means demand is persistently weak. But there's a growing theme or meme out there that it also is really hurting the U.S. And you see legislation put forth by two U.S. senators saying we should tax foreign investment in order to weaken the dollar and help remove that role. Is that a good idea? Should the U.S. unilaterally do something dramatic to discourage the international purchases of dollarized assets so that it weakens and that the dollar does not become essentially our cross to bear, as you put it?
Well, it definitely needs to be addressed somehow because there is a real cost. That means we typically have an overvalued dollar, which leads to trade deficits and budget deficits. That's how you create treasuries, which are highly demanded. And ultimately, it leads to a more leveraged economy than otherwise would be the case. So this bill is one attempt to do that. My fear is what this bill does is it effectively reduces the amount of safe assets available. Last time we saw this was in 2008, or something like this is in 2008, where we had the crisis, a bunch of AAA-rated mortgage-backed securities disappeared, and what happened? The dollar got stronger, yields fell. This would, I fear, do the same thing. I mean, a proposal that might be more effective, one I haven't put a lot of thought into, is just issue permanent currency swap lines to our major trading partners. That would make bank runs there less likely. It would make their banking system more secure, but it would also require some political persuasion. So politically, I don't see anything happening, and economically, again, big hurdles.
All right, David, let's just turn real quickly to what's going on with the Fed and a lot of the criticisms that we've heard from the Trump administration about Jay Powell, this idea that by standing pat with rates, or at least not moving aggressively lower, he's essentially allowing a tightening of financial conditions as a lot of the trade issues sort of swirl around. Do you think the criticism specifically of the Fed not moving aggressive enough is fair given the environment?
Oh, absolutely. If you think of kind of the textbook story of how we do monetary policy, you try to set the overnight rate or the path of overnight rates equal to some unobserved equilibrium or natural interest rate. And arguably, the trade wars and the uncertainty surrounding them has lowered that. So effectively, by doing nothing, the Fed's doing something. It's effectively tightening policy. Ben Bernanke in the past has called this a passive tightening of policy. So yeah, I do think it's probably behooves the Fed to get out in front of this. Now, I know politically it's tough, and the Dudley op-ed didn't help this any, but yeah, I agree with that view.